today we're going to go over some basics, not basics, but basically fundamentals of SpecFlow. So how we can set up SpecFlow in Visual Studio, how we can review the Gherkin files and start creating step definitions from that Gherkin file, and then creating the page objects for the step definition. This is more intended to be a follow along kind of a thing. So does everybody have Visual Studio on their machine?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so basically it's going to be a follow along, full on like walkthrough step by step on how to set up all this stuff. And the reason we're doing this initial one is so we can get the fundamentals. So when we start to look at the actual framework, we're going to be following the best practices there. So yeah, so with that, if anybody has questions, please bring it up during the process, because I don't want anybody to fall behind and feel like they can't ask questions, because that's just not true. So we have plenty of time to answer any questions that come up or any blockages that anybody might hit while we set this stuff up. And then at the end, we're going to have basically like a assignment task thing that will help reinforce the stuff that we talked about today, just to kind of help reinforce some of the fundamentals that we went through. So today's training, we're going to go over how to install the Visual Studio extension. So we're going to go through how we install the SpecFlow extension specifically. So once you install that, it'll actually give you a ton of templates for a lot of the files that we'll need. So our step definitions, our hooks, our page objects, our feature files, that'll all be within Visual Studio. So you won't have to like figure out how to create a .feature file or something like that. And then after that, we're going to actually create a new SpecFlow project. So just kind of, again, we're doing the fundamentals. So I want everybody to kind of, it's important if we're going to be writing step definitions and page objects for our Gherkin files that we understand what's happening in the back end. So if something goes wrong, we can kind of address that, or at least know where to look. And so after we create our SpecFlow project, we'll review a Gherkin file. It's going to be a simple Gherkin file. And then after we review that, we're going to build our first step. And then depending on where we go from there, after we build our first step and a page object that goes along with that, we may take a break, but if we're getting close to like lunchtime, we might, the building remaining steps is basically the assignment for today. So we're gonna, once we get to that point, we'll kind of figure out how everybody's doing, how everybody's feeling. If there's anything that people want added to the next training, we can talk at that point. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So again, I'm only going to have this PowerPoint up during the process, but the first thing we're going to do is install Visual Studio. So prerequisites, we need to have Visual Studio installed on our machines. So the first thing we're going to do, excuse me, is we're actually going to open Visual Studio. Actually, before we start, I'll show what the project will look like at the end. I did create a GitHub account or a GitHub project that you'll be able to, that I'll give to everybody. I don't know if everybody has a GitHub account, so I just wanted to make sure before I share it that everybody has a GitHub account later. This is mainly if you want to just have a copy of what I have on my machine. You can pull it down and play with it later if you want, but I'll provide that URL at the end. But the goal of today is basically to get a test running. So we have our SpecFlow set up here. When we run it, all it's going to simply do is going to go to Google, make a search, validate that it's on the search page, and then close. I want to bring that up because it's nice to have like a reference to look at. So I'm going to open a new, so we're going to open a new Visual Studio 2019. And I want everybody to follow along. So just please follow the steps that I'm doing as we're going along. So we're going to open Visual Studio. We're going to click Continue Without Code, which basically opens Visual Studio without opening a solution. Then we're going to click Extensions. And then we're going to go to Manage Extensions. And then let me know if everybody, once everybody gets to this point. Is everybody good?
I'm good.
Yep, I can see that.
Okay, awesome. All right, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna actually install the SpecFlow extension. So we're gonna go to Search, making sure that we're in the online component here. We're gonna go to Search and we're just gonna type in SpecFlow. And what you'll see at the top is there should be a SpecFlow for Visual Studio 2019. I already have it installed, so mine doesn't show a little install button here. But there should be a little download icon right next to this 2019. Has everybody seen that?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, cool. So just click that download. What should happen is that it should, well, you'll need to restart anytime you install an extension for it to start. So you'll restart Visual Studio after the download's complete, and then finish the installation. So once you click that, there should be like an MSI that pops up, basically a VSIX installer, and it'll ask you to modify or cancel. You'll just select modify to install to finish the installation. And I'll bring up the page too. Sorry, I have it on my. So again, we'll have the download button. We'll click the download. And then the next screen after you restart will pop up this VSIX installer. And we'll click modify. All right, I'm under the assumption that everybody has completed the installation for the SpecFlow for Visual Studio. So the next thing is, once you get your Visual Studio back open, we're going to actually navigate back to the extensions. So I will open this up. So I'll close this. So we're going to navigate back to extensions, manage extensions, and then we're just going to verify under installed that we have our SpecFlow Visual Studio 2019. And that's just telling us that the installation was good, everything was fine, and it's showing up properly in Visual Studio. All right. Okay, so the next piece of the puzzle, we're actually going to create a SpecFlow project. To create a SpecFlow project, we're going to right-click, File, New Project. And then under templates, you're actually going to find a new SpecFlow template. So mine obviously says it right here, but I'm going to type in SpecFlow just so you can search it. And you can see the template for SpecFlow project shows up here. What this is going to do is it's going to create a project with a pre-set directory. So it's going to create an example feature file, an example step definition, and then it's going to include the usual directories. Now, some of the directories that it creates we may not use, but it's kind of a nice template to have when you first start your project. So I'm going to click next after I select SpecFlow project. I'm going to name this SpecFlow training. We'll do training. We'll hit create. And then for test framework here, it's important that we use SpecFlow plus Runner. So SpecFlow plus Runner is basically Microsoft's runner for SpecFlow. The only caveat of using SpecFlow Runner is that you have to activate it after we choose to use it. It's a free activation, but it's part of Microsoft's process to, I don't know, capture information. I don't know what the reason for it is, but after we set this to SpecFlow plus Runner, we'll have to activate it by creating an account for each of us. So we'll create, we'll show that in a second, but I just want everybody to understand that. For framework, I'm going to use .NET 4.7.2. And then we're going to click create. So after that's created, we'll have, so it's obviously created the template for us. So we have a couple extra ones that we will probably not use for this training today, which is going to be the hooks and the drivers. We're going to create a couple of different things besides that. So let me take a look here. All right. So,
and Mike, which framework was it? My VS crashed. And
oh, no, it's okay. .NET Framework 4.7.2.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. So now that we have the template created, if you go to your Test Explorer, if you don't have Test Explorer down at the bottom, you can go to, I think, one of these, let's see, View, and then Other Windows. And Test Explorer is in there somewhere. Does everybody have Test Explorer on their main page? right here, Test Explorer. View Test Explorer. So at the bottom, basically Test Explorer shows you where all your tests are. But we need to build ours before it'll show up. So we need to build solution. Make sure that it says succeeded. And then if you go to Test Explorer, you'll see that the example test, or the example SpecFlow test, is a calculator app. And where that's coming from is obviously the features file that was automatically generated with our SpecFlow project uses this calculator.feature. This is just an example feature file, and then there's an example of step definitions that's created for that that calculator.feature. Now, what we want to do first is we want to run all tests. So down in Test Explorer, I clicked Run All Tests, and I don't expect it to pass. So what we want, yours should not show this yield, but in your console, basically, there will be a link that says Activate. Let me go down to here so we have some understanding. Yeah, so basically, after you run all tests in the console, there's going to be a activation link in the console. So we're going to click that activation link. It's going to have a specific specialized token that is specific to your user, and then it's going to open up a Microsoft. Basically, it's going to open up a web page for Microsoft. You sign in with your account, your Microsoft account, so whatever your work account is. And then you complete the forms and finish the activation. I would do it, but I've already signed in, so I can't do that again. Is there any questions about this part?
No, I think I'm good.
I assume if it's not showing you anything for activation, you're already activated. I mean, in your console, you're not seeing anything? I'm not seeing anything now. I ran all tests. It says 0 succeeded, 0 failed, 1 up to date.
Okay, let's see. Oh, so did you run it from here?
Yes.
Okay, and then when you select the test right here, over here, it doesn't say anything about activation link?
Let me see. What window is that? Test detail summary. It doesn't give any of that output. Okay. Okay, so let's see. If you right click, okay, so I'm guessing there's probably a standard output that's not showing. This output is actually, is this what you were seeing before? This build? Yes.
Yep. So this is the build. Oh, yeah, okay. So if we go up to here to this dropdown, we can switch it from build to test.
There we go. That shows a log file now. Okay, and then above it is the SpecFlow login. Okay, perfect. Okay, awesome. But yeah, so if you're not seeing it, you can go to output, drop this drop down to test, because by default it goes to build, and then the activation link should be in there. So basically, after we have that SpecFlow runner set up, the next step is actually just to rerun the test that we tried to run again. What we should expect to happen here is that it'll give you like a hazard warning, basically saying that instead of restarting and not running at all, it should try to run and give you this kind of output. So basically, it's gone through the step definitions and tried to run them. Obviously, we don't have any page objects or anything that are tied to these step definitions, so that's why it failed. And it didn't really fail, but it didn't run any because it couldn't find anything. So if we look at this, the step definition that was automatically generated under steps, calculator step definitions, we'll see that it's trying to call a scenario context. And then inside of each of these given statements, it's running a scenario context pending. So basically, it's just setting everything and skipping everything. So basically, I want to go through this file real quick, and then we're going to talk about
what actually drives this on the other end, so we can kind of tie these together. So obviously we start as testers, we start with our test cases. So that starts with the feature files. I think everyone's pretty familiar with creating feature files now. The ideal feature file is, we want to make sure that it's easy to read, not overcomplicated, and basically includes all the agreements. So like the tags, the IDs that the team wants, etc. Whatever the team agrees to include in the scenarios or the feature files, those are all being included. What you don't want to do with feature files is try to do sequential runs. So basically what that means is that we have 5 scenarios in here, and scenario 1 actually sets up the scenarios below it, and then everything's dependent on the scenario before it. I know that we had a little bit of trouble with that in the beginning, so I just want to reiterate that each scenario is its own individual piece of the pie that's going to run on its own. And so basically that's where we start, right? That's where everybody's used to writing, is these scenarios. The next part of that is the definition. So for this example, we have the calculator2.feature, which is our test case, and now we have our calculator step definition. And what that step definition does is it ties all of the steps that we have in our feature to actual code or page objects that it's going to run and perform the actions that the feature file is doing. So we have, for example, each step in that feature file is going to have its own step definition. So given the first number is blah, so this is basically like a parameter that can be passed to this step definition. So that number can be any number. So usually it's so for this example, we're using an integer because we're expecting a number to be passed here. So we use an int that we pass to the step definition. And then inside here, you can it's literally like you're just calling the action that specific step is going to perform. So for this, we would say the number is 5. The step here might be that we want to validate what the number is, or we want to pass in a number to a field or something like that. This is their generated code, so it'll make sense when we jump to creating our own in a second, but I just kind of want to talk through this stuff just a little bit. And then as you go, as you see, we have, for our feature file, we have given and when, then each of these has their own. So we have a given, and when we pass these contexts within the step definition itself. So these are just individual methods that are going to perform this given step. And that's why when we were talking about earlier in the process, making sure that the team agrees on terminology, because if this differs at all, so if I say the second number is, you're going to have to create a completely new given statement. If you say a step slightly different than the previous one, you have to create a step for it because it won't be able to find that step definition. So that's where that portion of making sure that you're keeping the same terminology when you're writing the steps and making sure that the team agrees on what to use becomes pretty important. So now, let's see, is there anything else that we want to talk about on here? Is there any questions about how the calculator and the step definitions files work together? Okay. All right, so the next piece of this is that we need to actually figure out how we're going to drive this. So this is the only portion of the training that's going to differ from how our main solution actually generates drives our actions. And what I mean by that is, like, we're going to use Selenium to drive it, but how you use Selenium in each framework is going to differ slightly. So this portion we're not going to dive into heavily, which is the getting Selenium up and being the driver, mainly because there's a lot of work that goes into that, and we want to focus on the SpecFlow portion of it. So basically, we use Selenium with SpecFlow, and Selenium is what actually drives the tests that are being generated by SpecFlow, if that makes sense. So Selenium is that key portion of it that kind of is under the hood, that once SpecFlow generates tests from the feature file using the step definitions, the step definitions then we'll call page objects, and those page objects use what's called a driver, and that's from Selenium. And Selenium is going to actually use that. We're going to use Selenium at that point to drive the actions that we want the test to perform. Is there any questions about that portion of it? Okay, so to get around this, I want to, I'm going to give a link to pull down a piece of code that we're going to include in our stuff. So basically, this is going to let us use a driver, and then we can move to the next phase where we create our step definitions. All right, so if everybody goes to that link that I sent in the chat, you should get to a GitHub page, and on the right corner here, we're just going to we're going to click on code, and then we're going to go to the bottom, and we're going to click on download zip. And then we are going to open this. And what we need from this is basically this framework folder. So this framework folder is basically the Selenium, everything condensed down into a framework folder to use the Selenium WebDriver. And again, we're not gonna step through any of these files today, mainly because this would just complicate things and confuse things with SpecFlow. So SpecFlow and Selenium are two separate things, but SpecFlow plus Selenium are used to drive the automation tests. So let's see here. So let me know when everybody has that zip file pulled down. So if you go open the zip file, you can extract it on your downloads folder or wherever you want to extract it. So I'm going to go. Where did I put the? I'm just setting where I'm going to extract it to. All right, so we have this framework folder, and then we're going to include this. So I'm actually going to, copy this framework folder. So I right-click copy after I've extracted it, and I'm going to go to my solution folder. You can do that in Visual Studio by right-clicking and going to Open Folder in File Explorer. That'll open up where your solution is currently held. And then I'm going to go to SpecFlow Training, and I'm going to right-click, paste. Anybody get lost in that portion? Basically, if you drag and drop it in, it'll only add it to where it currently is. So if I would have dragged and dropped that framework folder from the training folder here, it would have pointed to the framework folder in my downloads folder, and that's not what I want. I want it to be included in my repo. So I simply just went to the actual location that I wanted to drop it in and added it, and Visual Studio automatically updated. So is everybody else at that point where framework is shown here? So yeah, so now that we have, so everybody's good? That one was a little tricky, so okay, cool. So now that we have a framework in our folder, we'll briefly talk about what this stuff does, but basically we have a WebDriver factory. This is going to allow us to use WebDriver in our builds. Now, I want to stress that this folder isn't important to us for this training. It's just going to allow us to help use Selenium. Excuse me. So the next step is we probably have some build errors. I'm guessing that if we were to clean solution, rebuild solution, we should run into some issues. And that is because we don't have, we're missing some dependencies specific for Selenium. So if I were to open up this WebDriver factory, for example, it's going to say, hey, I can't find openqa.selenium. So to fix that issue, we need to go to our dependencies and right-click our dependencies, manage NuGet packages. So yeah, so again, we right-click, manage NuGet packages. And by default, it usually opens up with installed. We want to go to browse, and we want to type in, here, let me open this up, Selenium into the search field. So we're going to go to Selenium, and we want to include this, oops, my mouse stopped working here for a second, of course. 1 second here. all right, there we go. So we want to include Selenium.WebDriver, and we'll just take the latest version, which is 3.141. We'll just click install. Now, NuGet packages are different than extensions. We don't have to restart our Visual Studio when we install NuGet packages. If you're familiar with like Maven projects, this is basically the POM file that we're doing here. So the next thing that we want to install is one more, which is our actual WebDriver. We're going to use the Chrome WebDriver for this one. So we're going to do Selenium. I guess it's already entered there. We'll scroll down to Selenium.chrome. I'm going to type it in here. Selenium, I think it's WebDriver. There we go, this one. So sometimes people submit multiple versions of it. The one that you want is by this J Tsukamoto. And the reason is because he always keeps, that's always kept up to date. As you can see, this is 92.0. Chrome's latest version is 92. So you want to make sure that that version matches up with your Chrome. So again, this is Selenium stuff specific, but I just want to be clear that there's going to be a ton of Chrome versions. The one that you want is selenium.webdriver.chromedriver by this J Sakamoto. And again, we'll install the latest version. All right, and we'll look at our packages. So we'll see what else do we need. We need missing the namespace for in unit. So we're going to go back to the manage NuGet packages, and we're going to type in unit. And we'll at the very top, there's just an in unit one. 3.13.2 is the latest, so we're going to install that. All right. And then let's see what else we got. We got most of what we need. And then down here, we'll take a look at what's going on here. Some of these errors, they don't go away until you like actually open the file. So we'll kind of just go through these errors, make sure that everything's good. Is everybody have their errors at 0 now? If not, I did kind of speed through that, so I don't mind if we double back or not.
Are the errors supposed to remove, or do we have to rebuild?
Yeah, so you can either clean solution and rebuild, or click on the error itself, and it'll open up to the file that has the error, and it should resolve itself as soon as the file's open. Or clean and rebuild will take care of it as well. If not, we can talk about what the errors are.
Oh, looks like all the errors are gone.
Okay. Yeah, so the next step, so basically right now we have our Selenium framework. So this is the background or the backbone for our Selenium driver. We should be ready to go to the next step here. And that is, we're going to take a look at generating a feature file. So originally I have a feature file over here that I'm actually going to take for the smoke test. But we'll talk about it here in a second. Okay, so to create our first feature file, so let's say, just like we're doing today, we have a test case that we need to create. What do we do here? So we, again, because we installed that extension, we should have the ability now to use the template for the feature file. So you basically will go to features, we'll right click, we'll click add, then we'll go to new item. And then under visual C# items, there should be a SpecFlow that appears now. And we'll talk real briefly about some of the cool things that this includes. It makes life a little bit easier on certain items. So now you have the ability to have a template for feature.file. But we will, that's just kind of nice. So we're going to actually use this feature file. But the other ones that are nice to have is basically we have some binding folder or files. So basically, If you were working with a different version of like Selenium, you would use this hooks, what's called hooks, which is basically things that can run before scenario, like you can do your context and stuff like that before scenario, after scenario, or you can basically set up specific context to run every time a scenario is ran, and that's where you'd use hooks. Then we have our step definition. So that's basically kind of like that calculator step that we were looking at. It just creates a default template so you don't have to start from scratch. And then, yeah, so these are the three that you would use the most. We're going to use the SpecFlow feature file for our initial test here. So we're going to call this, we'll say search. And so again, that automatically creates a feature file inside your feature files. And as you can see, it automatically populates with a template. So it's always going to use the calculator one if you don't know which one you're using. So I'm going to actually add a scenario below that. Is the smoke test one. So I'm going to, we'll walk through and talk about what we're adding here. But so again, it's important. I'm not going to do Gherkin, or we're not going to walk through the Gherkin stuff heavily because you folks already understand how to create Gherkin files. But basically, the important things are that we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what's happening in our tests, and then we have overall excuse me one second. That the tests are easy to read. So like if anybody who was outside of technical abilities or outside of development was reading it, they'd understand what's happening. So I'm going to delete this because this is not what I want. And then we're going to write, okay, so every feature file has its own starts with a feature. So we're going to do search test. The feature description is going to be search, or enter a search term. SpecFlow, we're going to have, I'm just going to tag it with SpecFlow training. You can do the JIRA ticket or everything that we're normal to do. So my scenario here is the user must be able to enter a search term into the search box. Given, oh, I messed this up, given the user opens the Google search URL. User enters a search term as QA. Well, it doesn't have to be QA underground, but whatever your search term is here. So we can do city, and then oops, I hit the back button on my thing. And then user is able to. I added a couple extra users when I did that. User is able to access the search page. So it's a simple feature file, right? The simple test, all we're doing is basically we're going to Google, we're going to enter a search URL, or we're going to enter a search term, and then we're going to use, validate that we're on the access, or we're able to access the search page. I know everybody's aware of what a feature file is, but is there any questions about a feature file or different types of things that we can do? Okay. So next, what we do is we need to create a step definition for this. So we need to tie all of these step definitions to a specific action, right? So to create our step definitions for the search test feature, so we're going to go to steps. We're going to right-click steps. We're going to click add. We're going to go to new item. Again, under Visual C# items, we have SpecFlow. We're going to use the step definition template. We're going to call this search. Get rid of this. And then click add. All right, so by default, you can see that it adds a lot of the stuff for us, right? So this is kind of nice that it gives us a start. Now we need to modify it to work with the information that we have in our feature file, right? So one of the first things we need to do so we can use our, so basically we can use our Selenium stuff that we're using from our framework, is we need to add a couple things at the top. So we're going to, let's see here. Go here. So we can go right here, we'll add it. So right below this, go to SpecFlow deal. We don't really, just something that's auto-generated as part of the thing, so we can kind of delete this so it's not confusing. And then we're going to do protected. We can build our driver. That's going to error. We need to include our SpecFlow framework from our framework folder. Again, if I go through this too fast, let me know. But basically, we're going to be setting up so we can use our driver inside of here. So, or we can pass our driver to the page objects. So that's why we're setting up this local driver builder at the top.
Do you do this exact thing every time?
So again, this is the Selenium portion of it. So this would be different for the framework that we're going to touch on Friday. But this is mainly just to set up our driver again. This is why I don't go heavy into the Selenium stuff, because it's kind of annoyingly like monotonous to have to do this every time. Normally you would just pass like a base test, and that base test would pass the driver to all the tests. But because we're doing the quick and dirty way to get Selenium to drive our actions, because that's not the scope of this, we have to set this up manually like we're doing right now. But normally, like when we do it on Friday, this is a piece that will be handled by the base driver. So it's going to be part on Friday. It'll make sense because we're going to go through the differences. But it's important to, the only reason we need to do this is basically so we can actually run our tests and see our results, which is why we have to set up Selenium at all. Normally, you can just add SpecFlow to any Selenium project, and Selenium's already set up, so you don't have to do this stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And again, that project that you pulled down already has this stuff set up. So if any of this stuff gets lost or your solution just kind of goes haywire, you can reference that project too, or run that project directly. But this is just kind of the annoying parts of it, of setting it up.
Is there a reason that local driver builder would not turn green?
Yeah, so if it doesn't turn green, it's because it's missing a using statement. So an easy way to do that is to right-click the file. Here, hang on, let me get rid of mine. I'll show you. Right-click the error, or actually just hover over it. There should be this show potential fixes. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Click that, and at the top, it suggests that you need to add specflow.framework.
Okay.
Which is from our framework folder. You just click that and it'll add. And literally, like anytime you get an error, if you go to that show potentials, like potential fixes issue, I'd say probably 70 to 80% of the time there's a solution for your issue right there. Anytime it says like generate something, that's when you're pretty much, that's not going to help you. So, but yeah, that's how we do that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a protected. We need to set up our starting URL, which is going to be google.com. Protected string, and then we're going to call it starting URL. So it's camel case here. I do URL. You can do whatever you want as long as you use the same variable. And then one final thing we need to do is protected string, and then we're going to do target browser. There we go, and then let's see. we should be good now to start transferring some of our steps from our feature file over. And again, I want to reiterate, because this is where it gets a little confusing with training specifically, because we're using our own Selenium deal to set it up. Usually you can just right click and add the step definition template and then just start going with these steps. I apologize, because this could be confusing that I'm adding like the Selenium specific stuff to it. But I'm going to call it out, so that way if you go back to the recording and everything like that, you can reference that this isn't going to be done every time, especially with the framework. But I only bring that up again because we're gonna do some more Selenium specific stuff down the road here in a second, but I want to make sure we call it out when we do it. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to go back to our feature file, which is search test.feature. So I'm going to close a lot of these windows so we don't have a bunch of stuff open. And inside of our feature file, search test.feature, we're going to take a look at our steps. So the first step we have is a given, and we do user opens the Google search URL. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to go here, and we're going to enter that. So basically, that's our first thing, right? So we're setting up our user opens the Google search URL. The method name itself is going to be usually named after what is happening in the given statement. So given the first numbers, so given the user opens the Google and then the actual value we're passing through is going to be the search term. So the search term is going to be a string of letters. So we're going to change this int to string. And then we're going to change this to something simple like search term, so we remember what it is. And then inside here, so anytime that this given statement is called inside of any scenario file within the search term steps, it's going to run any method that's being called inside here. So this is ideal for if you're using like page objects, and page objects are basically page actions. So if we go into here, we can delete all this generated code, so we can get rid of that. It automatically does the search pending, so we can comment that out if you want, or delete it. So what we need to do here is we need to do a couple things, right? So what do we need to do to get to the Google search URL? We need to set up, and we're just going to basically, this is how you do automation in general, or this is at least how I approach it. We always set up, I always set up pseudocode. So the first thing I want to do is I need to set up or start the browser and go to google.com. That's the action that I need to create. Now, the next step was we need to actually create our page objects. So to be able to do the action, we need our step to tie to an action inside of a page object. So we're actually going to create a page objects folder inside of our directories here. So before we move on any further, I'm actually going to clean up this structure that we're not going to use today. So let's go to the hooks. Let's right click hooks and get rid of it. So we'll just delete it. That way it doesn't dirty up our framework. And then same with drivers. We'll go to drivers, right click, delete. And that's mainly just to avoid any confusion on our already complicated setup. So we'll right click. So now we need to add our page objects. So we're going to add the directory for that first. We're going to right click, add new folder. And there we will call it page objects. Is everybody familiar with what a page object is? If not, we'll definitely want to go through that because this is fairly important.
I'm going to safely say no.
Okay. Okay, so basically page objects is if you were on any page, any website, the page objects are the elements on the page. So so basically think about the elements as like the login field, and then the login button, or the password field, and then the password button, or any element that can be interacted with on the page is basically text fields, buttons, drop downs, those type of elements that require that you can perform an action on. And the page object is basically taking that whole page. So for example, the login page, and making a class out of it. So when we want to perform an action on the login page, we want to call the login class, which is going to have all the actions you can perform on the login page for us already created. So that way, when we do the automation, we don't have to manually rewrite and define all the elements that we want to call for each action. We can just call the login page and say login, and that'll enter our login, our username, and click the login button for us. And it's made to be, the hugest thing for page objects is reusable code. So that's where that concept comes from. And for our example, we need to create a login page, a page class for our Google search page. And you only want to include the elements that you're going to be using. And the reason you do that is because you don't want to clutter up your page object class with a bunch of actions that you're never going to use, because that when somebody else comes onto the project, it becomes difficult to go through the code and understand why there's 1,000 elements that someone defined. You only define elements that you want. So we'll get into that a little bit heavier when we create this page object here, but the concept is basically each page that we're testing is going to have its own page object. So login page, navigation bar, configuration page, etc., are all going to have their own classes, and they're all going to fall under this page objects class, or this page objects directory. And then inside of here, we would basically just say, login page dot login, and then that is how our step definition knows that when anytime this is called, we will run this code. Does that make sense a little bit? Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. All right, so the first step we're going to do for our example test is we're going to go to page objects, and we're going to add our first page class. So we're going to right click, add new item under page objects. And this isn't a SpecFlow deal, so we're going to go to code. I'm going to select, let's select C# class. And we're going to change that name to, I'm going to use homepage for an example. So this homepage is going to be Google's homepage. All right. So again, this is like a default template. So it gives us our class and our default namespace. It's important that we have this namespace because we need to be able to, this namespace is how we call this class from other classes. So we'll be, for example, if we're in a different namespace, or we're in a tester, or we need to call the homepage class, we would do a using statement calling SpecFlow training.pageObjects, and that would pull us to that class. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to set up our driver. So we need to do iWeb driver. So to be clear, everything that we're going to type here is how every page class is going to be created. So every page class is going to have an iWeb driver instance, an iWeb driver weight, and I'll go through all that stuff, but I just want to make sure there's nothing here that we're doing special anymore outside of like this stuff has to be done for every page class. Doesn't matter what we're doing for, like, I just want to differentiate that, because when we get into we were talking about Selenium doing one-time stuff to get Selenium running. This is not that. This is what we do to create a page class. So we do iWeb driver. It's okay if you get errors as we type these. We're going to fix those in a moment. And then web driver weight. So these two things, again, this gives us an instance of the driver so that we can perform our action on the page. And then the WebDriver wait actually allows us to perform a wait action on our action that we're trying to perform. So if we want to wait for an element to be present on the page, we'll use the WebDriver wait to be able to wait. We could pass in however long we would want to wait for that element to actually show up. So if we want to give 30 seconds for the login page button to show up, that's what we'd pass into it. And if it shows up after 2 seconds, it'll make the selection after 2 seconds. But if it goes past 30 seconds, then it's going to fail, saying that the login page button didn't show up, for example. Pretty important key to that. So as we can see, we have iWebDriver. If we hover over it again, we have this show potential fixes. There's also the option of using Alt-Enter. I always only remember this for short term, so that's why I never use it on a daily, but it's suggesting that we use OpenQA Selenium, so we're going to select that, and that'll fix the iWebDriver. For the iWebDriver wait, we'll do show potential fixes again, and then we'll use openqa.selenium.support.ui. All right, so the next step is to basically set up so we can initialize our driver. So anytime we call the home page, we're going to have to pass a driver instance to it so that we can make sure that we're using the same driver throughout the whole test. So the key to automation is making sure when you write when the tests are written, that the same driver is used for the same test throughout the entire test. Otherwise, you'll get into scenarios where it'll get lost, or the driver will close and then not finish the test, or just kind of like early problems with automation in general. But overall, you want to just make sure that we're going to pass the driver to the home page so that it's using the same driver that the test expects, and we don't run into those errors. So that's what we're going to fix here by doing a public, and then we're redoing the home page here. And we want to make sure that we pass in iWebDriver driver. And under here, we'll do this dot driver equals driver. So again, setting our instance of our driver to our local, and then we'll do this dot wait equals new web driver wait. Inside there, we got to pass our driver. So again, this is where we're setting our time limit for how long we want to wait for elements. And we do that by doing a time span dot from seconds to a minute. Did I lose anybody on that portion? Basically, this whole chunk of code here is using our instances that we created here to set up our driver so that we can pass a driver.wait limit to it so that it properly waits for elements to load before trying to select them. Otherwise, if we didn't do a wait, Selenium's pretty dumb, so you kind of have to tell it what to do. So you have to say, if you don't tell it to wait, it's going to try to perform the action like as soon as the page transitions to the next page. I mean, we know that all web pages take a little while to load, be it 5 seconds or a minute. So if we let it just run right away, it would fail out right away because it wouldn't find the element and then it would fail. Because most web pages can't keep up with that quick of a selection. So if we add this wait, that allows us to make our selection. Any questions about that? Okay. Or is anybody not up to where we're at right now? Okay. And again, this whole project is up on that GitHub that you guys pulled down with the zip file. So if you try to run this later and it doesn't work, or we try to run this at the end and it's not working, you could reference that file as well, or that project as well, because it's the exact same stuff that we're doing here. All right, so the first thing I like to do is I like to use regions. So is there any questions like why we're doing all this Selenium stuff or why this homepage stuff is? Because I want to be clear that most of our work's not going to be in the search term or in the steps itself. It's actually in the page class. So that's why we're spending so much time on the page class.
I guess my question being, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but it's like, I don't know why we're doing this. Like if like this dot driver and this dot wait, like I understand what they do.
Right.
But I wouldn't know, like, if I, like, where would we go? Like, I need to be able to click something. Where would I reference that? I need to be able to wait. I need to be able to do any number of things. Like, I think we're following along, at least I am, I'm following along with what we're doing, but I would not know the resource to, if I needed to, like, do interactions or something. Like, I don't know why we're doing this. I mean, I know why we're doing each step, but I don't know why we're actually committing these particular functions.
Yeah.
So
oh, sorry.
I just want to know if that's expected. Like, I understand what we're doing, but not why we're doing any of it.
For sure. I expect this stuff to be like completely like foreign. I expect it not to make sense right now because, you know, a lot of it, so mainly the whole point that we're doing the home page iWebDriver, this whole section right here, all has to deal with trying to maintain the same driver. And that's why we have to do this dot driver, because this dot driver is actually set up in our framework. And that happens at the beginning, as soon as the test is initialized and is generated, that driver is created. And that's why we're doing this dot driver, because that's the driver that was built by local web driver or local driver. And then, local web driver. And that is why we do this dot driver, and we equal it to driver because down below we're going to create action methods, which is basically like select this element. And to do that, we need to pass the driver element. So this is a really complex project, or like concept to try to condense into such a short time. I don't expect folks to like understand, because if we were doing like a full-on Selenium training, this would be like multiple days, and that's why we had to skip a bunch and use the framework. But I expect this to not make complete sense while we're setting up this portion of it. The main thing that I want to drive home is that this portion is the same for every page object that you're going to create. So you're going to here's what I like, my personal way that I create page objects is that I create a template with this, where I create a new page object and then make sure that these two are named the same, because this stuff is identical code. So you don't have to rewrite that every time. But the core, you brought up a great point. Like, this isn't something that you're going to have to, that I expect you to fully understand why it's happening. It's just something that clicks with you as you use it and move forward, if that makes sense. Like, as you use it more, you understand why it's there. But I don't expect, like, I mean, like, this time span from seconds, it's like, what is that? Who knows what that even means, like, if you've never used it before. So I totally understand that.
Okay, great. I was just making sure I wasn't, me at least, I wasn't missing something.
Oh, no, we're good. Okay, so basically we've initialized our driver for our homepage at this point. And that means that we can now perform actions with any of the methods below that we create. So there's 3 steps to creating a page object, and the first one is to initialize the driver, like we did at the top here. The second step is to define our web elements. So we're going to tell it what IDs or what path to look for. And then the third is to write our action methods. So the next step we're going to do is define our web elements. And we do that by, I use what's called a region. So a region basically just helps keep things organized in your code. It's not executable. Nothing's going to execute that you write after region. It basically just lets you label what's going to happen in between this little sandwich of region. And that'll make sense here in a second. So I'm going to do #region homepage properties. And then I'll return twice, and I'll do #endRegion. And what that does is it gives me this little fun plus button, minus button. And basically any code that I write inside of here test code will be scrunched up in here. And we do that because some pages can have, hundreds or 50 or 60 different properties that we need to define. And that can make your code like really hard to read if you don't try to organize it. And that's the purpose of a region. So we'll do the region there. I didn't mean to do that. Okay. So the way that we define an element is we do a couple things. So we need to define, I know that the search field for Google is, you could find it by doing by.name equals q, but we'll go through that whole process because normally we're not going to be able to, you're not going to have that kind of information on hand. So we'll go to Google. We're going to open up our browser. We're going to go to google.com. We're going to right click and we're going to go down to inspect. So again, we open our browser, we go to google.com, which is the starting URL that we're going to be starting with, and we go down to inspect after we've right-clicked the search field. And what that does is it opens up the innards to google.com. Now, it's going to name a lot of different attributes for the search field. We're going to use the name for our element definition, and that name is just simply Q. And basically, that's just saying this search field right here is Q. So if I turn this little highlighter on up in the left corner of inspect, I can go through every attribute that's in here and kind of figure out where I'm at. But it basically highlights. It's a nice way to like figure out if you need to dig in a little bit deeper on an element to find something that's selectable. But for the search item, we're going to actually use this Q attribute. So we could go back to any questions about finding how to define an element? Yep.
Yeah. So when you say elements, do you mean like finding like the class, the IDs, like the specific attributes to?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. 100%. So what's really great is if you can work with the development team, you can create your own custom element for your own custom attribute. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. That's where you get really successful with automation because you can set like an automation _ID and you'll always know what that is, right? Or the team can set it, which is super nice. So we'll use K. We captured that this one's called K, so we'll go to back to our Visual Studio project. And now we're going to define that element. So in C# we have to create an instance of an iWeb element. So we'll do iWeb element. And that's basically telling our code that whatever we're creating below this is going to return an element that we can make actions on for Selenium. And we're going to call it whatever we want to call it. I'm going to actually call this search field because that's what it is. And then inside here, we're going to create brackets. So everything inside the search field is where we're going to define our element. So we need to get our element, and we get our element and return it by, and we do that by using the driver instance that we have up here. So we're going to do driver dot find element by name. And then inside of, I'm going to close this off. So basically, there's multiple different ways you can find it. The most reliable is ID, if you can use ID, or using XPath with an attribute that we've already set specifically. So like an attribute that can call like automation ID, like we gave for an example. But right here, we're going to use name since that's the attribute we found when we looked it up inside of Chrome. So we're going to pass Q in here. So right now we have defined what a search field would be when we call it in our properties down below. So next we're going to, for right now, that's all that we need for our properties. I'm going to go down to here and start creating our method. So below the region, so like this region we can either close. I'm going to leave it open in case somebody wants to look at it more, but that's the idea about the regions. We can close it, but below our region, we're going to create our methods for what we want to do on this page, on the home page. So we need to do inner text or inner search text. We're going to do a public void, and then we're going to call it let's call it inner search text. And then we're going to pass in a string, and the string that we're going to pass in is our search text, or our search term. That's probably a better version of it. And then again in the brackets. So anything that we perform inside this method is going to do actions to, I always name my methods for what the action is going to do. So we're going to enter search text. So the action we need to perform in here is to enter our search text. So to do that, I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to do a wait. So that way, basically we wait until the search field is ready to be able to be performed an action. And then we're going to do a send keys. And that send keys basically enters our search term. And then we're going to do another send keys to hit the return button. So we enter our text and hit return, and it automatically performs our search for us. So to do the wait, because we have our wait up here, right here, we know that when we use that wait, it's going to basically give us a timeout of 60 seconds to find that web element. So we'll do wait dot until, and then we'll do x equal or greater than search field, and we'll do a send keys. So right now we've set up, this is our web, this is our web element. I could have just called it, I'll show you an example here after I finish this, but right now we've set up our element with a wait around it. Then we do dot. And so basically after you have your element set up, you can hit dot, and it gives you all the list of the actions that you can do. So I can do a click, I can do a clear if I wanted, I can do a ton of different stuff to this app, or to this web element. Now I can do checks, I can do is displayed, I can check to see if it's there. I can run it a multiple different ways, but we're going to use send keys because that's what we want to do. We want to send our search term. And basically I just pass the search term here. So what that means is that anytime anybody writes a feature file, if they enter whatever search term they enter, and they use that that text that we have from our feature file. So if they use user enters a search term as, and then whatever's after that, it doesn't matter. It's going to pass that search term to this page object so that it can enter that search term. We're going to pass in the search term there. If we were to run this right now with just the wait, it would go to the Google homepage, it would enter the search text, and then it would do nothing. It would just sit there. The reason for that is because we haven't told it to click the button to go or the return button. So the next one we want to do is our return button. We'll do search field dot send keys. And this time, instead of, we don't need to return our search keys again. There's actually a class called keys in .NET. So you can do keys, it should automatically find it. If it doesn't, we'll use the potential fixes option. And then basically send keys it allows you to pass in all the keys from your keyboard. And we want to pass in the return button. Okay. Now, again, if you had like a global wait that was set in your Selenium base test, you would be able to just do, send or search field dot click, and it would automatically wait. The reason that we wrap it in a wait is because we're setting our wait per page class. Any questions about this portion of it, the method? How that's being worked. So basically this search field is this web element that we defined right here. So anytime you see this, it actually means this, driver.findElement there. If you don't define it above like you're supposed to, I would have had to have done driver.findElement and keys. I would have had to do this every time I wanted to do anything to the search field. Same with the syn keys, key return. So by defining it above, it helps quite a bit clean up the code and better understand what's happening. Any questions about this piece, the action method? Okay. So we're going to save. So we'll go over briefly what's in this page object. So we have initialized our driver. We have our web element defined that we're going to use, and then we have our public search text, which is our enter search text, which is going to perform the action on the page. I'm going to save this. Okay, so if we go back here, I want to copy this because I want to bring this into our next statement here. So we have, this is a win, so we'll do win, and then we will pass this in. I'm sorry, so I just was doing it like I was doing it by myself. If we go back to, so from home page, we're going to go to search terms. We're going to go down to the next statement. So we have that given, user opens the Google search URL. The next one is a win from our feature file. We have a win, and then user enters search term as whatever. We'll go back to search term steps. I changed this given to a win context, and then I'm going to be pasting in the win statement from the feature file. So the difference here is that I don't need this test automation university as our search term because it'll automatically pull that if I do parentheses dot star or wildcard. So it'll automatically, anything that I enter there or the user enters there, it doesn't care about anymore. But it will care about what's written here. So like that's, again, back to terminology, super important when you're writing the Gherkin files to have the terminology be the same as the teams, because if it's not, it'll be a huge problem as far as you're going to have to write a lot of different step definitions. So that's why getting the team terminology down is important. So the next thing that we need to do here is we actually need to, and this is, I'm going to write that this is special to this framework, special. And we need to do a couple of, we need to basically initialize the driver so that we can use it within our test. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we don't need this scenario pending. It's just basically tells it to skip it. What's special to this is going to be, we need to do an instance of the local web driver. Oh, sorry. Builder. I could have typed it. And then what are we going to call this? Oh yeah, new local web driver builder. We're creating an instance to to be able to build our local web driver. We're going to pass in some instances here. Again, this is, I'll tell you when we're done with the special to the Selenium piece. So this is all special to the Selenium piece. Normally this is handled by the base test, but my base test is not acting like I want it to, so. Equals Chrome. So I'm going to repeat all these steps here real quick. So we're setting up our local driver builder. So we'll do local driver builder, call it builder equals new local driver builder. Then we're going to define our starting URL that's being set in our base test. I have a bug in it. So there's a bug in there right now that's not being defined in the base test. So that's why we're defining it here. This is starting URL equals http.google.com, basically telling it where we need to go. And then telling it, we're defining our target browser and telling it that we're using Chrome. Otherwise, if we're using something else, we put Firefox or IE or Safari. And this stuff, again, is handled specifically from the Selenium framework that's being ran. And that's why I want to just make that super extra duper clear that this is specific to this Selenium framework, but not to all frameworks. So normally this wouldn't be showing up inside of our step definitions, but only for this scenario that we're doing. I hope that doesn't confuse somebody, but basically it's allowing us to use our driver inside of here. So next we're going to do var driver. This is where we're going to actually build our driver. So we're going to do builder dot launch. We're going to do pass in our target browser and this starting URL. And then finally we'll do driver dot manage. Now I'll be updating the that repo that everybody was able to pull from with an updated version of this that works without having to write all this stuff inside the step. That we'll be able to pull and double review on Friday if we want. All right, so that's the end of our special to this Selenium framework. End here. Okay. All right, so now we can get into doing calling that actual homepage method that we called from the beginning, or that we created in our homepage class. To do that, you need to create a instance of the homepage, and we need to pass our driver to it. So this is very familiar if you've ever looked into tutorials or anything about page object pattern or POM frameworks. Basically, you create an instance of the page object, and then you can call that page object and its actions directly from the test. So we're gonna create that page object right now. I'm gonna call it homepage, and then I'm gonna do new homepage. Then we're gonna pass in our driver. Now, homepage isn't found yet, so we can either look at the show potentials for right away. So it picked up that we had the page, that our homepage class is part of the namespace for SpecFlow training.pageObject, so we'll use that. That should fix the homepage class. And then we will actually call our action. So if you remember, our action in here is enter search text. So we'll do homepage dot, and you can see that it already found the search term that or the method that we want. Kind of easy because there's only one method in there. So we'll choose enter search text as our method. And then we're going to actually do, let's see here. We're going to actually pass in our string. I see that I skipped one important thing. Does anybody know what I skipped that I shouldn't have skipped when I was setting up this method?
You didn't rename it.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to rename this properly so that and pass in what we're actually going to be getting here. So this needs to actually be given the user. We'll call it. I'm going to get rid of that. Given the actually it's a when. We'll do when the user enters and this variable is going to be a string, so we're going to change that to string. We're going to do that as search term. All right, so now whatever comes through after as is going to be considered our search term. So we can actually pass that search term to our method that we created on our homepage class. So we simply just write or pass the search term to it. So we just say search term. And now it's going to go to here. Our search term will be sent as keys, and then the return key will be sent. And then for good terms, we'll do driver.quit. Just for this scenario, we're going to change that. Again, this is Selenium specific. All right. Is everybody to this point? So we have our specific to our special to Selenium framework that will not be in Fridays when we go through Fridays. But the key here is this portion right here, this meat right here, is what, no matter what SpecFlow setup we're going to be using, that's what we're doing inside of these step definitions, is defining what page we're on and what action we need to perform while we're on that page. So is everybody on this step with me?
Yes.
Okay. And then before we move on, I need to add one final one, so that way our test has a then. So I'm going to copy this then statement from our search test.feature. And I'm just going to scroll down to the next one, which is a when statement. We're going to change that when to a then. And we're going to just paste this here. And then we're going to rename it. So then user is able. And then I'm going to replace this scenario context with a console write line. So a console write line basically writes to the console as we're running the test. So I'm going to do console dot write. Oh, if I can spell. So console dot write line, and then we'll just say that this is right. And I'm actually going to, so it's console.writeLine. I'm going to, I want it to print out step def access search page. I want to actually copy this and put it in our initial one too. So I just know that this one's running as well. And then we're going to call this one step def. Okay. If everybody has entered those console lines, we should be ready to run our initial test. I'm going to close that down. I want to get rid of these extras actually before we do that. To run, and then it runs into a pending. So I just deleted the final statement or step inside of here. So we have 3 steps in here. We have a given, a when, and a then. We have a console, basically a printout to the console for our initial given step, and a printout to the console for our initial then step. We're not done with them, obviously, but as we're working on them, we can enter that information. And so we can see it in our test result. And then the important thing again is that when we run our when statement to enter our search term, it's gonna, instead of our step definitions, is gonna tie our feature file to our page object, which is our home page. And it does that again by creating an instance of the home page, and then we're calling the method that is in our home page, which is enter search text. Again, as for the recording purposes, this stuff is handled by the Selenium framework itself, not important to creating the step definitions for itself. So if everybody's at that point, we can go up here, clean solution, build clean solution, and then rebuild solution. Then we can, if we go to Test Explorer, we'll see a new spot here. It says SpecFlow training. The user must be able to enter a search term into the search box in search test. We can just simply run that. So in the Test Explorer, you can click on the scenario that you want to run, right click, run. And if we built it right, it should open up. Oh, didn't open up. I got an error. So let's take a look at that error. Did anybody else get this error too? I'm assuming. Oh, okay. So did everybody get that error?
I got a lot of errors, so.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, that initial error that I got basically was saying that we had a parameter mismatch for this given step. Because I didn't actually include like this parameter wildcard. It was expecting a parameter wildcard because I had in there, I was passing a search term. So I'm going to actually remove from this given statement, I need to remove this string search term and save it. And then we should be able to get rid of that. I'll walk you, we'll start on those errors that you're running into real quick. 1 second, I just want to make sure that this error got resolved. Okay. So was everybody able to remove that one issue there that I had? With basically, the given statement needs to have the string search term removed out of the brackets. I put it in the wrong one. And then we can start working on issues that people are running into.